Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this important discussion today. My name is Jade Curtis. I am the executive editor of BDO and your moderator for this evening. I want to thank you all so much for joining us for part two of our discussion on the FDA Diversity Action Plan. This new draft guideline aims to increase minority participation in clinical trials. During this episode, we will dive into what the mandate is and means for our community. We will also talk about how you, our audience, can be involved in the conversation. And lastly, we will discuss the importance of Black participation in clinical trials. So without further ado, I'd like to start welcoming my panelists in. Hello, Winora. How are you?
I'm great, Jade.
Wonderful, wonderful. We also have Perla Nunez and Kamal. Wonderful. I'd like to take a quick second for you guys to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about what you do. And yeah, that'll be our way of kicking us off.
Great. Who do you want to start first?
Yes, Winora, would you like to get started?
Sure, I can do that. So I'll start with my name is Winora Johnson. I live in the Chicagoland area, and I'm a three-time cancer survivor. I was diagnosed with stage 3 colorectal cancer, followed up by endometrial and basal cell carcinoma. And these additional cancers that I had were actually found through genetic testing. And that's why genetic testing is kind of dear to my heart. And the other side piece that comes with that is that I'm very passionate about the work that I do, work with various organizations who promote, of course, genetic testing, clinical trials, and cancer survivorship.
Thank you so much. Perla.
Hi, Perla Nunez, a longtime researcher. My whole career has been in research, preclinical and clinical research. I am now doing consulting work, and what I do is I want to work with groups that are very intentional and genuine about wanting to increase the representation of underrepresented communities in clinical research. This is not something new. This is something that we've been trying to do for a very long time, and it takes time. So when the FDA came up with this guidance, I was jumping up and down because I'm like, this is it. This is the pivotal time where this will happen. And so I am so excited and thrilled to be on this panel today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. We're excited to have you. Come on.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Kamal Mangrajani. Super excited to join you. I am a physician by training, a practicing oncologist prior to joining the White House. And now I work with the Office of Science and Technology Policy in their Health Outcomes Division. And we had a session on clinical trials not too long ago where the FDA actually made the announcement about the diversity action plans. We're super excited to champion this and really thrilled to be a part of the conversation today. So thanks for having me.
Of course. Kamal, I want to talk really, really quickly about the Cancer Moonshot Initiative at the White House. And just really quickly, I want to talk about the importance of that program and what you do there. Just because, as presidents rotate in and out, sometimes programs can be left off of the list of things that get kept. So I want to talk about the importance of what you do, why it needs to stick around, and just highlight that just for a quick moment. I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, no problem. So the other hat that I wear as I am an oncologist is that I work with the Cancer Moonshot here at OSTP. The Biden Cancer Moonshot has been an incredible program. Initially started in 2016 when then Vice President Biden was in office, and then was reignited in 2022 during his current administration. And so we've been, thinking about cancer writ large. How do we think about preventing cancer? How do we think about detecting it early? How do we think about things like navigation services and really providing support to patients, families, and caregivers as they face cancer? And so this work has been incredibly meaningful. And, I'm happy to talk a little bit later about how we think it has been incredibly impactful for people who are facing cancer. the Biden administration is committed to seeing Cancer Moonshot through. And last Tuesday, you may recall that one of his first appearances in recent weeks was President Biden in New Orleans at Tulane University, talking about the administration's $150 million commitment through Cancer Moonshot towards improving cancer surgery. So, there's a lot of activity still to be done with this administration. And, nobody knows what's going to happen in November, but our hope is that the Cancer Moonshots work will continue on.
Yes, we are hoping so as well. And thank, again, the three of you for all of the work that you do in this space. It's so impactful and it really makes a difference, which I'm sure you all know. So let's go ahead and dive right into our conversation. And Kamal, I want to start with you and just ask you to explain the new FDA draft guidance on clinical trial diversity and how it is different, from the previous mandate.
So I would call this more of a requirement that the FDA has put into place. So even in previous years, the FDA had requested that if there was a clinical trial being done, the study sponsor, the people doing the trial, submitted information about how they were making sure they were capturing diversity within that trial. And the reason that this is so important is that as a physician, as a doctor, if somebody comes into my office and they're Black, for example, and the trial was done only in white people, then it's going to be hard for me to say with 100% certainty, yes, this treatment is going to work exactly the way it was studied. I feel confident that you're going to have the same outcomes. I feel confident that you're going to have the same side effects. So having clinical trials that are representative of the entire US population allows us to be better doctors and allows patients to know what they're getting into if they start a specific treatment that has been studied through a clinical trial. And so in 2022, there was a law essentially passed that said that the FDA can now require that for large studies, so we're talking about these big phase 3 studies that are often used for FDA approval of a new treatment. And there's a couple of other instances where this can be used, but the FDA can now require that the study sponsor submits information about key demographic characteristics. So these are things specifically race, ethnicity, sex, and age group that should represent the US population. These are the things that the FDA is requiring, but the FDA, with this guidance, is also encouraging study sponsors to think about other factors like geographic location or gender identity, socioeconomic status, pregnancy status, sexual orientation, or other comorbidities or other medical issues that people may have who are enrolling on the clinical trial. So the more diversity that we can get, the more representative these trials will be, and the better we'll be able to have those conversations with people who are looking to start treatment. So the FDA is super excited about this. We at OSTP are super excited about this. And we hope that this will encourage more enrollment from diverse populations throughout the US. In the past, when this was more of a suggestion and less of a requirement, we did see that there was some efforts to increase community engagement, but we really hope that this is going to light a fire under people and really increase community engagement, because I think, seeing that representativeness is something that's very important to this administration.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And you mentioned a lot of the excitement, right? And I know Perla talked about how excited she was. So Perla, I'm going to ask you, why is this mandate significant for the future of clinical trials? What makes you so excited about this mandate?
The fact that it's going to be mandated, because in the past, those of us who advocate for this are constantly, I'll say fighting, right, for the rights of those who don't have a seat at the table. But it's been episodic, right? When things happen, then all of a sudden, like, you see a movement happening, and we want to include people that are of color. And then it dies down, and then we're back to square one, right? So with this, it's going to be mandated. People are going to be held accountable. And that's a huge word, accountability, to make sure that demographics are being represented, different, sexual orientation, languages. People are they're going to be able to enroll and study in languages that they speak. So that to me is what gets me very excited. It's that this is, I'm hoping, not episodic, but it will be sustained, and people are going to be held accountable, and transparency is going to be huge.
And are you feeling confident that it won't be episodic? Are you feeling confident that this will be maintained?
I am very confident, yes. Because like I said, people are going to have to report, right? And if you're not showing that you are enrolling those numbers that you said you were going to enroll, we're going to, have to, continue to figure out how you're going to enroll those numbers. It's not going to be like, oh, okay, we'll leave that to the end, and then people come in and rescue the project, right? The study, to get those enrollment numbers up. No, it's going to be, that's my hope, right? That the numbers are going to be watched. And if you're not fulfilling those numbers, you're not going to be able to proceed until those numbers are being accounted for.
Absolutely. So Kamal, you talked a little bit about, and I'll open this one up to the group, but you talked a little bit about encouraging engagement with the community. And I guess, what does that look like? Because I know that we have, I believe it is until September or the end of September to comment on the guidance. And so for those who don't know, what does that look like? Do you have to, write a letter? Do you have to call in and leave a voicemail? What does it look like? How can our audience be engaged in the conversation?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So maybe we can talk a little bit later about, strategies writ large for improving community engagement. But when it comes to the diversity action plan itself, people can just Google FDA Diversity Action Plan, and one of the first hits that will come up is the Federal Register, and this is a site where people can submit comments, and the comment period is until September 26th. So people have a little over a month to be able to submit any comments that they want. So if people, want the FDA to require that, there are enough multilingual patients who are enrolled in the study, or they want people of a spectrum of sexual orientation or a spectrum of socioeconomic status, whatever these factors are that people feel strongly about, and if they want to voice that to the FDA, this open comment period provides a platform for them to do this. The other thing that people can do is they can engage, for example, with blackdoctor.org, with other advocacy groups, so that these groups can put together a comment in the Federal Register together, as opposed to each individual doing it themselves. And sometimes it's just a little bit easier because then your voice is put together with other voices. And sometimes it feels like, okay, it's a little easier. It's a little bit louder. I'm not doing this by myself, but my ideas are still a part of this. So there will be, I'm sure, advocacy groups that are looking to have their voices heard. So I encourage people to go out and engage with these groups. And I know, I know that you're on the call. Both of you are also very familiar with how that process can work. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on how people can get more engaged.
Yeah,
So I just quickly want to say that I went online today, and I put in the chat, but I don't know if this goes out to everyone. There's only been 13 comments so far online, and I haven't commented on there, so I'm not one of them. But, I wanted to do a call out today to everyone that's listening to please go in and comment, and let's have our voices be heard. So just wanted to say that. Sorry, Winora, didn't want to cut you off.
That's okay. I've been chomping at the bit here, just waiting, trying to jump in. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get a chance. This is like bubble dutch. I'm gonna get that chance. No, this is just great. As a person who has a hereditary cancer, who with me being identified as a Lynch syndrome patient, having more cancers probably in my lifetime, being involved in a clinical trial is essential for me. But let me tell you, I've been at my same oncologist. It's going on 13 years now. And out of those 13 years, not once has anyone ever mentioned to me about a clinical trial. It's only because I've become this passionate patient advocate that I know that these clinical trials are existing out there. And I actually hunted down a PI for this specific one that I'm in. And if I could give you a little bit of a statistic from the American Association for Cancer Research, And this survey was conducted in 2023, and it said that overall 69.8 respondents were willing to participate in clinical trials, but not asked. Why is that? So if someone had maybe, when my initial diagnosis was in 2011 began, had maybe just sat down and asked me who maybe looked like me or could relate with me culturally, that answer probably would have come even sooner to participate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I really appreciate you for sharing that with us, by the way, and telling us a little bit about your backstory. And we'll get into that a little bit later on as well. But being that we have two advocates on the call with us as well, I do want to ask and just circle it back to how we can get more people engaged and involved. How can health organizations, patient advocates, healthcare providers get their community, their patients involved? Because like you said, you weren't offered, it wasn't offered to you. And until you went and did the work yourself, you wouldn't have been involved. So how can people who are in that space actually start talking to their patients about it?
Well, I think it begins with just plain old communication, communicating with the patient about opportunities of additional forms of treatment that are out there. And clinical trial is not your last, oh, I'm going to die moment, so I take a clinical trial. No, it could be a really great another form of treatment. And I think that's where it begins. It has to begin with communicating with the patient so that the patient understand their own options. And then once that's happened, then it becomes the health literacy part. Is it broken down so that the patient can understand, even if it's presented to them as an option?
Yeah, I wanted to add in that a lot of times, doctors or the staff don't really know what a clinical research is, right? It's not something that they have in medical school, and we need to bring awareness and education about what clinical trials are. There's a lot of myths out there, and we need to let people know about the pros and cons. You don't have to be sick to participate in a clinical trial. Clinical trials need healthy volunteers as well, right? You can leave a study at any time. You can withdraw from a study. You don't have, well, for certain studies, you don't have to have health insurance. There's just a lot of misconceptions about what clinical trials are. But you have to bring that awareness. You have to bring that education into communities. And one of the projects that I'm working on with the FDA, Office of Minority Health and Health Equity, the REACH Consortium, what we're doing is we're working with federally qualified healthcare centers here in North Carolina, where I live, and community health workers. And we're developing a curriculum, some kind of product for them to be able to just tell their patients, have you considered clinical trials? These are what clinical trials are. Just start those conversations. We have to start those conversations, because if you explain it to people and give them the choice whether they want to participate or not, people will consider participating, but they don't know what they don't know. So we need to make sure we do it in a way that they feel comfortable us explaining it to them, that somebody that looks like them, that talks like them, that knows that this is something new to them. So we take the time.
Yeah. Truthful and transparent.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm getting some feedback. Hope you guys aren't hearing that too.
I did. I heard some background noise, but.
Absolutely. And so as we talk about the importance of, getting healthcare providers and advocates involved, part of this mandate, or a part of this requirement, is for trials to be more transparent about their enrollment, right? And so I guess I'm curious, is that the best way to go about it? is that helpful? I guess, how will all this be implemented? What does that look like? Pearl, I'm going to pass that one to you.
Well, it's going to be mandated. And so I want it to be transparent. I want us to know what is their what are these studies? Are they reaching those enrollment goals that they set in their diversity action plan that they were going to do, right? So I'm hoping that it's going to be transparent and that we're going to be reaching into our communities a lot more, but not just transactional, not just go into our communities, oh, we need you for a clinical trial, right? It can't be transactional. We have to develop those relationships with the communities and get their trust. Trust is crucial. So, but I think with the mandate, like I said, accountability will come into play. And it would be nice that you include it or that you have this percent, right, of African American or Hispanic or women. You have to have this number. So.
Absolutely. Do you think it'd be beneficial to involve these organizations? Should they be a part of the mandate?
In the community organizations?
Yeah, maybe even if the trials or the sponsors are working with organizations, should they talk about that within, while they're being transparent? Should they talk about how they're involved in the communities?
Yes, please. I want to know. I want to know how you're working with your communities, right? Yeah, absolutely.
And
Definitely.
Jade, can I pop in and say too, when it comes to transparency and communication, I was looking at some information that I came across that I didn't even know about or maybe wasn't aware of about how Moderna,
Mhm.
when it came to the COVID-19 vaccine, it says reported that Black Americans represented 7% of the trial versus 13% of the US population. The company slowed the trial to recruit
Mhm.
more people of color and
Wow.
as trial participants. Why isn't that widely even known? Because that makes a difference when you are trying to promote and educate people that there are companies out there that when they realize that there's a disparity or these numbers aren't matching, that they slow the trial and step in to do something about it.
You brought up a really good keyword right now. Why isn't that widely known? I knew about it, right? Because I helped with that, and then with Pfizer and the Janssen vaccine. But you're right. Like those those companies that are doing this extra step, they need to speak up and be proud and be loud about this work that they're doing. Yes, you're absolutely right.
And so that's another thing that I'm wondering is, while there is this requirement, that doesn't necessarily change people's desires to want to be a part of a clinical trial. So what can be done to encourage, or I guess what can be done to improve accessibility, for example? Kemal, I'll pass that one to you. What can be done to actually improve those numbers? It's required, but are people
Yeah.
going to do it?
Yeah. I mean, you raise a great point. I think that I'm really glad with the FDA diversity action plan guidance that now this is coming to the fore. People are going to talk about it, but to actually have the infrastructure in place to do it, like that may take more time, right? It may not be immediate. And so, what are the steps that will get us from here to there? So, one really big example is thinking about how do we get trials closer to where people are, right? So this could include rural populations. This could include communities that don't have big academic centers. How do we actually get the trials to where people are? And so the administration is thinking a lot about how to do this and actually just announced $100 million that is a partnership between BARDA. I'll have
Mhm.
to pull up the acronym for you, the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, between them and Walgreens. And so working with Walgreens and their clinical trial system, and what are the things that we can
Yeah.
do? A lot of people don't have a big academic clinical center close to home, but a lot of people have a Walgreens that's not too far away. So is there some way that we can leverage existing infrastructure future so that we can try and meet people where they are. So this $100 million investment is meant to figure out, what does that look like? How do we model it? How do we pilot it? How do we get information back so we understand, is this working? And if not, how do we pivot to a system that will? So I think the commitment that the administration is making is really clear, because we're sort of putting our money where our mouth is, and hopefully that $100 million investment will really go far towards helping reach people where they are. There are a lot of other potential strategies that we can use to increase recruitment, but I'd love to hear from Winora and Perla in terms of things that you all have seen work.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna say that we cannot ask people to come to us, to sites that are an hour and a half away in the middle of the day, when the communities that we are trying to bring awareness to, recruit for studies, have jobs where they can't leave in the middle of the day to drive an hour and a half to enroll in a clinical trial. We need to go to where the communities are. So we need sites where the communities are, look at federally qualified healthcare centers, look at free clinics, look at public health departments. We need more principal investigators who look like the communities. So, I mean, we just need to stop giving, I shouldn't say that, but stop, I'll just say, giving the trials to the same sites, right? Where that is not where the communities are. Let's think outside the box. Let's figure out, can we do enrollments on the weekends? Can we have enrollment on, in the evenings? Can we have childcare, right? There's just a lot that we need to think about. And believe it or not, people will consider enrolling if you do all those things, because then we are we're meeting them in the middle. We're not just asking of them. And, without them, we can't have clinical trials. So let's figure it out.
Yeah, Perla, you brought on some really good points. I had my little laundry list here too going, and the top for me, of course, was that time off from work. I mean, even
Mhm.
though like I said, I have a really good job who's understanding, still taking half a day off from work, that that maybe if you don't have vacation time or sick time, that
Mhm.
you get charged for, and then there's the travel. I'm fortunate that I have a vehicle to drive. Most individuals, we can't assume that everyone has transportation, or they're taking an Uber or a Lyft. How about meals and parking? For me, every time I parked at this medical facility, it's a big sign that said $56 for the day. That's a lot of money if you're coming, especially if you're going in for a blood draw, something as simple as a simple blood draw. So,
Mhm.
really keeping in mind what the patient is experiencing. And even for me, there were still copays that I had to pay out of pocket too. Keeping those things uh, considered for patients is a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Oh,
and
sorry.
realizing that everybody's reality is not the same,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Like I have a car. I don't mind driving an hour and a half, but not everybody's reality is the same. And not everybody can do what we think that everyone should be able to do. I recently did some focus groups, and I had two migrant field workers who said, "Well, I don't think I can participate because I can't read or write." And I said, "Well, don't you?" I went and held their hand, and I said, "Don't you worry about it." I said, "I will read these to you, and you will answer. And if you are willing to do that with me, we will get this done." And they did it, and they said that they are hardly ever treated that way, because in 2024, adults, people don't think that there are people who still can't read or write, but people's realities, everybody has a different reality.
Yeah. And I think that nuanced perspective is so important. I think, working directly within communities to understand, what are individuals' needs, and then how can we meet those individuals where they are so that we can encourage them to be a
Oh,
part of the research process. It's going to be different for each person, the things that are holding them back, the things that are worrying them, and having those conversations to be able to draw that out, to be able to gain that understanding with the person who's sitting across from you, I think really is the first step to trying to engage people in the research process.
Absolutely. And I think even just talking about these things and opening up that conversation is what's going to make a big difference within these mandates. And again, community, this is why we want you to be involved. This is why we want you to speak up, leave your comments. We only have 13, we can add a million. So we really
yes,
could, yes, to
yes.
Lenora, I want to lean into something that you mentioned about, copays. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions around clinical trials. Some people believe that you may have to pay out of pocket. Some people believe that you'll get a placebo and not get treatment at all. So can we talk about some of the misconceptions? I'll open this one up to the group, but some of the misconceptions around clinical trials that just kind of need to be talked about to maybe someone who's considering it and worried about those things.
I think the biggest one for me is that my insurance company maybe wouldn't approve of it. And so this played around a lot in my mind as I considered going into this clinical trial. And it took just a phone call to talk to a representative who stated that,
Mhm.
yeah, under policy guidelines such and such, um, you know, um, they're covered and you shouldn't have to worry about it. And that if you have a problem with anything, to let them know. So I found that very accommodating. And so sometimes just the simple act of reaching out to your healthcare system providers and so forth, they're even willing to go the long haul for you to make sure that you're not stuck with unnecessary costs associated with participating in clinical trials. And it's a relief because for me, it's life saving. I mean, it means that much to me and my family to participate because it's something it's a hereditary component. It passes
Mhm.
down. And so if I can be involved in something that's not just life saving for me, but for my family members and for others who may just look at a vaccine as being, oh, they're experimenting on me. But what if you could not get cancer again
Hmm.
through
Right.
a vaccine? That possibility is real. And if we don't have the proper representation for it, so many of us will lose out. We won't get those true benefits.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people don't trust clinical trials because of history, right?
Yeah.
Bad research has been done. And I always say we need to acknowledge, yes, that happened. We are not trying to cover it up. But because that happened, that's why these laws came into place. That's why we have an institutional review board, right? That's made up of people that have no experience in clinical research, some people, different people, to make sure that research is being done ethically. So there's a lot that is done behind the scenes,
Hmm.
to make sure that clinical trials are being done correctly. And so but I think, it takes time. You have to explain this and you have to, like I said, acknowledge it. Don't try to cover it up and you don't want to, be caught lying or anything like that about, oh yeah, that, like make believe like that was not a big thing, because no, it was a big thing, right? Because people of color were treated this way because of the color of their skin. So we need to make sure that we don't try to cover that up. And that's how you build trust. I keep saying trust, trust.
Yeah, it really is crucial. And you mentioned placebos, and just so that people have a sense, people think of placebo and they think of, oh, it's something that's inert, that's not going to help me, that's not going to do anything. There's a whole bunch of different types of clinical trials, and on some clinical trials, every single person is going to get treatment, and on some clinical trials, half the people are going to get treatment, or a third of the people are going to get treatment, and the others are going to get um, something where we consider it the standard of care. So when we're considering how to design a research study, we would never give someone a placebo if there is an actual treatment that's FDA approved, that's out there, that's available. We would give them that standard treatment, and then we would give them the opportunity to get some new, cutting edge treatment instead. So, this idea of like, am I not going to get any treatment? The way that these trials are designed has to be consistent with ethics. And there's a lot of thought that goes into how do we make sure that we're doing the best thing possible for this person. And so, in addition to trying something that may be new where we don't know if it's going to work or not, we also want to make sure that a person has access to whatever the current standard is. And in some cases, there is no current treatment, and those people may get a placebo. But in a lot of cases, if there is a current standard of care, that's what's going to be offered. Um, you also touched a little bit on, misconceptions about payment, and both the FDA and the NIH actually have really great websites that go through this information. Also, I'm going to throw in a plug for clinicaltrials.gov. Clinicaltrials.gov has a tab at the top that talks about the basics, and it's a really great place to start. It'll give people information about what to expect on a clinical trial. It'll give people a whole list of questions that they can go in so that they're prepared when they meet with their clinical staff. They can sort of say, wait, I need your time. I have all these questions from clinicaltrials.gov. I want you to go through them with me. But the FDA and the NIH both have information on their websites about what people can get reimbursed for if they're on a clinical trial. And this is going to vary from trial to trial. Who's providing the funding? If it's a big pharma company and they're putting a lot of money behind the trial, they may be able to do things like pay for hotels if you have to stay overnight in order to participate. They may be able to reimburse for that, $56 parking fee that Winora is going to face. They may be able to cover the cost of transportation. Some centers can even help set up transportation for people who don't have cars, so they're not relying on public transport if it's not reliable. So these options are all there to try to make it easier for people to participate and not make it such a financial burden. There is a lot of variability. So this is something where it's really important to talk to your clinical team, your clinical trials team, and say, for this protocol, can I get help? And if there is no help in this protocol to help reimburse these expenses, what about your institution? Is there a social worker I can talk to? Are there institutional resources? How can I make sure that this doesn't create a financial hit for me? And most centers, have been really thoughtful about how to face this, and they will have some sort of support available. So it's just important to be the one who asks that question because they won't always think to offer those resources even when they exist. But according to FDA and NIH, it's totally fine. You can get reimbursed for your expenses. It's just a matter of asking those questions and figuring out how.
I actually really appreciate you mentioning that, the importance of asking question. Um, and I know this might be a heavy hitter of a question, but are there any questions that you can think of off the top of your mind, any of you, that a patient should ask right out the door? I'm thinking about doing clinical trials. What do I need to know? And quick shameless plug, Black Doctor Clinical Trials Resource Center. We've got the clinical trials too, and the information that you need as well. Shameless plug. But yes, any questions that a patient should ask their doctor, or if they're already in a clinical trial, what should they ask to make sure that they feel supported, to make sure that they feel like they fully understand what's happening?
If I could jump in really quick, I think for me, participating as in a recent clinical trial, my biggest concern was, is there going to be pain or an adverse reaction to anything that I'm taking or doing? In other words, is it going to stop or prevent me from living my everyday life? So that was a real concern for me. And also, are there things that'll disqualify me from participating? Do I have some unknown or a health condition that could keep me from participating? And then I do all this paperwork, do everything, only for blood work to show that, well, you really can't participate. So things like that are really, really important.
Yeah, those inclusion exclusion criteria for clinical trials. Um, I've been blessed with good health. I have asthma, but nonetheless, I've participated in many clinical trials because if I'm going to advocate for it and ask people to consider participating, I'm going to do it, right? So, having been in this environment my whole career, I know what questions to ask. But when I was a coordinator and I would enroll people in studies, you know, the risks, the benefits, the side effects, all that is on the informed consent that I reviewed with the patient. But
Mhm.
I know it's a lot of information that when they get home and they read that or look at that informed consent, they're going to say, "What did she say about this?" Or what? So I used to give people my phone number and say, "If you have any questions, please call me because I know I'm reviewing a lot with you here today, and you're going to have questions. And you can call our office number, but I enrolled you in the study. So here's my number." And that's another way that I built trust with them. And or I would say, if you need to know about a resource here in the county where we live, reach out to me. And word of mouth got out a lot. We used to ask people, who referred you? How did you hear about this study? And they would say Perla, right? Because their friend or their family told them about this experience they had when they enrolled in this trial, and they would call and find out more information. But it is a lot that when somebody enrolls in a clinical trial, there's a lot of information that they have to digest. And when you go home and you start looking at it again, you have questions. But the care that people get in participating in clinical trials, if you call up and you say, "I'm feeling a certain way," we're going to have people calling you and bring you in and make sure that you're okay.
And,
But
Perla, you're a rare gem. Let's put it that way. But this is where we have to teach patients to also be their own self-advocate.
yeah, yeah,
It
yeah,
that's the way of the world now, unfortunately.
yes,
So self-advocating is going to be important.
yes, yes, absolutely. Speak up.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And, again, I'll just put in a plug. There's a website from the National Institutes of Health, NIH, and it's called NIH Clinical Research Trials in You. And on that page, that's where you're going to find, they just give you the list of questions that you can sort of take in so you know what to ask when you walk in. And, I think a lot of the questions that I used to hear from people, similar to what Winora was saying, is what are the side effects of this? And sometimes people will say, well, we've only had 10 or 15 people on this study. It's kind of hard for us to say. And sometimes they'll say, you're the 100th person on this interventional trial, and we kind of have a good handle on it. The other questions that I would hear people ask is, Doc, how likely is this to work? And, I think one thing that it's important to sort of be fully transparent about is, at least for these, interventional clinical trials where we're really pushing the cutting edge of medicine and we're really trying to figure out how do we develop a new standard of care. Only about 15% of the time does a clinical trial that starts at phase one make it all the way through to FDA approval. And so, when we sit down and we discuss clinical research, we're going to do our best to match a person to a clinical trial that we think is going to work. And that person is actually very brave in volunteering because they may get a benefit and they may not. But at the end of the day, what they're doing is they're creating that body of evidence, for evidence based medicine. They're creating that research so that, in another 2 years, when a different patient walks in who fits that same profile, I can say, hey, there was a volunteer who came before you and they went on a clinical trial. And now I can tell you, is that a new standard of care? Did it work or should we try something else? And it was because that person was willing to step up and participate in the research process. So even though with every clinical trial, our goal, if it's an interventional trial, is to try to offer somebody a new treatment that's going to knock things out of the park, that's going to work better for them than anything that's, come before, it sometimes ends up that that person is volunteering to advance the science. And that's a really incredible gift that they're giving to all the people who are going to come after them.
So
Absolutely. Well, Nora, I want to
yeah.
circle back to something that you mentioned a few moments ago about advocating for yourself. And it brought me back to the fact that that's a very common word amongst our community, amongst healthcare professionals and health media. But what really is advocating for yourself? And also, what is, as you have in your title, a patient advocate? What is that? For those who we say it so often, but I feel like it's not as common as we think it is.
Right. And totally understand that question, which is a good question. It basically means, as a patient advocate, that I'm supporting patients, caregivers, you're raising awareness, you're pushing about research funding, education, and outreach, which is, of course, a little bit different from self-advocacy, because as a person who is a self-advocate, I'm advocating about Lynch syndrome, clinical trials, all that stuff, because I have a personal experience
Mhm.
associated with it. And
Mhm.
so patient advocacy is the voice for the voiceless, is almost what I want to say, for those who really can't speak up or don't want to. I remember when I became a patient advocate 10 years ago, and starting this work, and I was just sharing my story all the time, and it was therapeutic for me. And I'm thinking, why aren't more people doing this? And I
Right.
had to really, I came to this understanding and realization that not everybody wants to be a patient advocate either.
Hmm.
And so, with that realization, then, changing the scope of how I'm thinking as a patient advocate, then if I can't teach you to become a patient advocate, then I can maybe teach you to self advocate for yourself. How
Right.
many times have you gone to the doctor? And I've caught myself doing this many times. I sit there and waiting for the doctor to come in. He comes in and he goes, "Well, Lenora, how are you doing today?" And I'm like, "I'm fine." And knowing darn well I'm not fine. I've got a headache that I've probably had for a week. My
Mhm.
feet hurt. I've got neuropathy. These little small details that I've left out that makes the doctor think that, well, she's doing okay. She's told me physically that she's doing okay, but inside I'm really not. And so this is where self-advocacy is, I think, is so important, because we have to learn to speak up, especially where it comes to our health. We get that one chance, that one opportunity. There's no do-over in another life. This is it.
Right. Right.
Carla,
And
did
ask the questions. Ask the questions. I know a lot of times as a culture we think, oh, that's going to sound dumb, or that's going to be a dumb question. But no, ask it, because, you know, if you don't you need to understand. And if you don't understand the way they're explaining it to you, explain it to me a different way. Right. But make sure that I understand. So ask.
And I think, having been on the physician side of things, I understand it must be overwhelming for people to get so much complicated information all at once. And so, even though a lot of people will get that, they'll get that printout that they can take home and they can read more about the
Mhm.
study, and they have that informed consent document, which sort of
Mhm.
goes through the specifics of the trial, it's a lot at once. And so, just like you, Perla, I would say, call me. If you have a question, if you don't understand, even if you want to talk through a second time, a third time, a fourth time, that's
Mhm.
okay, right? Like that's why we're here, is because we want to make sure that people understand and feel comfortable and have their questions answered. So, totally agree. I know that sometimes there can be that fearfulness, like, oh, I should have understood this the first time. Oh, I know they
Right.
told me this, but I forgot.
Mhm.
You just got to get past all of that, because you need to make sure that you really have the answers you need to feel comfortable being a part of the research. And if that means you're asking the same questions again and again, that's
Good.
okay. We're here to support
Mhm.
people through that process and to help them get to that point of really understanding what it is that they're signing up for, and make sure that they feel comfortable. And the only way to do that, like you said, Perla, is for people to feel comfortable asking those
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah.
So can I jump in
Absolutely.
here again? Because I love you guys already. It reminds me of a quote that, of course, is by Maya Angelou, who says that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And
Yes.
you all just mentioned the most
Mhm.
important aspect of all of this is how you're making the patient feel.
Mhm.
We care.
Yeah,
We care.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
We show up
Mm-hmm.
we show up every day for the people who are
Right.
facing these diseases, right? This is
Right.
our
Right.
life's work. And so
Right.
whatever it is that we can do to make it a little bit easier, to make it a little bit simpler, that's what we
Right.
sign up for.
Yeah.
Absolutely. More conversations like this, more resources. We want to share them all.
Yeah,
Right.
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Absolutely. So unfortunately, I know we're having a love fest now, but we are running low on time. And I would love to continue talking to you ladies, but I do want to hear your final thoughts, whether it's on clinical trials or on the mandate and how our community's voices need to be heard. I would love to hear your final thoughts. Kemal, I'd love to start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate this discussion today. I think that Winora and Perla, you brought up some really fantastic points. I think clinical research in this country, we have great infrastructure throughout the country, and I think that we're doing a lot of work to try to improve that. I think hopefully this diversity action plan guidance will really spur a lot of people to think about how can we meet folks where they are? How can we make sure that clinical research is a lot easier for people to participate in? There's other work going on throughout the government, including from NIH, to try to integrate research with primary care and see if there are ways to engage communities. And I think people are thinking a lot about, how do we hold recruitment events that might be after hours for people who are working during the day? How do we use social media? How do we use patient advocacy groups? I think people are starting to get creative about how they can reach out to people in communities so that we can actually achieve the goals that we set out in these diversity action plans. So I think this is a huge step from the FDA. We're really excited about it, but I think it's one step and hopefully what will continue to be, an all-out sprint as we try to really include more and more people in the research process. So I'm thrilled about this and really excited to see where things are going to go.
Winora, do you want to go or you want me to go?
Well, I could go.
Okay. Okay.
What I was thinking immediately is that I'm coming for the researchers, the scientists, and this is what I love to say to you. I recently read this book called Creativity Inc., and it had some really
Mm.
good information about understanding that change is uncertain and part of life,
Mhm.
and that we must embrace our failures. So be open to problems and learn from them. And all of these clinical trials that are out here is it's a learning process for the patients, and we want to be inclusive of including as many and all patients as we possibly can. And so that's my urgent request from those researchers. And then as a patient, I'm pushing to for you to self-advocate for yourself. If you don't know, reach out,
Hmm.
look for guidance, and don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah. So my hope is that with this guidance, that again, it won't be episodic, that we will get those numbers that we want. It's not just about the numbers, but we need to be representative.
Mhm.
We need to represent the communities where, that have not been represented in clinical research. So I'm just really hopeful, and I always look at the glass half full. So I'm very hopeful that when the final mandate comes out, which I'm hoping will be at the end of this year or early 2025, that we will see that our communities are being represented, but we still need a lot of work in going into the communities and talking about what are clinical trials, right? Going through the history of it, acknowledging what's been done, in the past with bad research, and but not just being there one time and talking about it, right? Maintaining those relationships is so important. And, it doesn't take, I mean, it takes some money, but it doesn't take a lot of money, right, to stay in communities. But I want it to be bi-directional. I would love that the community learns that the FDA, it's a trusted, and not just the FDA, but clinical trials are a trusted environment. We did ACRP RTP chapter, the Association of Clinical Research Professionals, and someone from the FDA came and spoke about, their department. And they were like, wow, she was like normal. Like she was, and I'm like, yes, the FDA is not this, group that we shouldn't talk to, right? Like they're real people and they care. But, you always think like people, so it's just about bringing people from those, levels to the communities. So the communities realize that they're one of us. You're one of us, right? And we just have that trust. That's how you build trust.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I want to thank you, ladies, once again for joining us and sharing your insights. BDO community, please let your voices be heard. Leave your comments. If you need more information, we have dropped so many gems on this conversation. But as always, BDO's Clinical Trials Resource Center will have everything that you need. If you have any more questions, if you need to find the link, again, it's on our in the Facebook Live and also in the chat and also in our resource center. So I want to thank you all once again for joining us, and we will see you next time. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you so much.